Just like I speculated a while ago, in Echoes of Wisdom, Zelda has its first female director from Nintendo allied to a co-director from Grezzo. I got both of the specific names wrong, but although it's not the specific individuals I was expecting, having researched both of them in a little more depth for this video, Nintendo's thinking is becoming clear. So in this video, let's meet the Echoes of Wisdom directors Tomomi Sano from Nintendo and Satoshi Terada from Grezzo, dig up their own histories and come to understand why these two now seemingly hold the future of top-down Zelda in their hands. Plus we'll see what happened to other members of the Zelda team. So the first source for this news came straight from Nintendo themselves via the Ask the Developer interviews for Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. One of my favourite underrated things Nintendo now puts out, by the way. The developer interviews are very upbeat about the future of top-down Zelda as a going concern, and it seems that while Eiji Aonuma was very involved as always, even writing big parts of the plot, the central driving forces were a mix of Grezzo and Nintendo. This pattern of an internal Nintendo director alongside a director from the development company reminds me of the way Fire Emblem games seem to be managed alongside Intelligent Systems, and I think it's very clear that this is going to be the new template for 2D Zelda going forward. As Aonuma-san says, as a producer, it felt like watching your child grow up. I'm really grateful for all the hard work. I hope lots of people will enjoy this new top-down The Legend of Zelda and will be excited for future top-down The Legend of Zelda games too. So I'll link the Ask the Developer interviews below, but it's kind of interesting to explore where both these directors came from. What is their background? In the case of Sano-san, she has a long history with Zelda and has demonstrated quite a diverse range of skills during her time at Nintendo. Her earliest work was doing texture work, character modelling and artwork, including on Tekken 3, but in the mid-2000s, she seems to have joined Nintendo full-time, taking on coordination and project management roles, although still flexing her artistic muscles occasionally, as with her credit for design support on 2010's Mario Sports Mix. Since the beginning of the Grezzo partnership with Nintendo, she has had a role to play, credited for coordination on both Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D. Still, to hear her tell it, she arrived relatively late in the development for Majora's Mask, telling Satoru Iwata for an Iwata Asks segment about Majora's Mask 3D, "Although for me, I joined during the latter half of development, so most of the components were already finished. So my role was to review the existing issues with the game that were found by Mario Club, and if there were moments where it seemed the game was putting on a challenge too much like what they were saying just a while ago, I went over those areas from a player's perspective and made recommendations on whether we should fix certain issues or leave them as is, since they added to the game as part of the challenging flavour." This was a good role for her to have, as she found that the original Majora's Mask was too challenging for her to complete, and she was able to identify where the game blocked progress due to a lack of skill, which seemed fair, and where it just wasn't clear how areas could be cleared, which was frustrating to her. Although she would continue to support project coordination, her big break into directing would be when she stepped into the role of assistant director on Twilight Princess HD. She told Nintendo Life about her experiences of making the graphics work. She said, "We also went through a lot of trial and error with the graphics. When we created more precise models of objects to go with the higher resolution, we found that everything was too clear, and we lost that soft and delicate atmosphere that you get, in particular, at twilight or with the light in a forest. We had to strike a balance between the parts where we could be precise and the parts where we tried not to make things too clear. We worked hard to make the graphics look really nice while still preserving the feel of the original." She also seems to have initiated the idea that any amiibo used in conjunction with Twilight Princess HD would grant bonuses as long as they're from the Zelda series. After cutting her teeth with the Zelda Team, she also supported with the Mario and Luigi titles Superstar Saga and Bowser's Minions, and Bowser's Inside Story and Bowser Jr.'s Journey, both in the capacity of an assistant director. For Link's Awakening, she returned to the role of project coordination. As Eiji Aonuma tells the Ask the Developer interview, he almost always asks her to join him on Zelda collaborations with Grezzo. I'm reminded in a way of another little tidbit of news that leaked out recently, which is that Shigeru Miyamoto was saying that the purpose of the Nintendo Museum was originally to let Nintendo employees get an understanding of the history of the company. The nearly 20 years Sano-san has worked at Nintendo in roles from graphics to project coordination to directing, and the decade of experience she has had on Zelda specifically by the start of Echoes of Wisdom development marked her out as the ideal person to step into greater responsibility while also being deeply invested in the Nintendo philosophy. But she did not do so alone. Working alongside her at Grezzo was Satoshi Terada, a first-time director but someone with a very long history of working on Grezzo Zeldas, starting with map design for Ocarina of Time 3D and continuing with this side of things through to being the map modelling lead for Link's Awakening. He was also the map designer for Grezzo's original but still Nintendo-published titled Line Attack Heroes and Ever Oasis. In fact, in the latter title he was the map art lead. He also kibitzed on the 3DS version of Luigi's Mansion, responsible for, you guessed it, map art. Isn't it interesting that while Tomomi Sano had a real diversity of experience, Satoshi Terada came from the very specialist background of map design, albeit one where he was clearly becoming progressively more senior. I also find it curious that the one game that neither the Echoes of Wisdom directors worked on, the one Grezzo Zelda where neither of them have a credit, is Zelda Triforce Heroes from 2015. Now, there were perfectly understandable reasons why they weren't available to work on that title. Sano-san was working on the Mario and Luigi titles at the time, while Terada-san was presumably bootstrapping Ever Oasis for just over a year later. Still, I wonder what it says about Eiji Aonuma's feelings about that title that he wasn't concerned about promoting people who had collaborated on development for work for that title, which was, after all, the most recent 2D Zelda original game before Echoes of Wisdom, albeit you might not count it if you don't count the multiplayer titles. Still, it's no poor reflection on Grezzo. Actually, what is surprising is how much latitude Grezzo had. They were even heavily involved in pitching ideas, with Terada-san noting that every single Grezzo employee was thinking of ideas to the extent that it took 3 days to even sift through them. To quote the recent Ask the Developers interview, yes, there naturally was quite a lot that changed. To mention a major change, at the start of development, we asked Grezzo employees to pitch internally their ideas for this new Legend of Zelda game. More specifically, we asked Grezzo, if you were to make the next new game, what kind of game would you like it to be? We had the opportunity to hear ideas from members of Grezzo, which they came up with freely and proposed. Terada responded it was a big event for Grezzo. After all the remakes we had been working on, this was the time we were challenged with a new game project from the conceptual stage. There was even a time when every single one of Grezzo's employees was thinking about ideas. Thanks to this, we came up with so many ideas that it took us 3 days just to go over and review them. Since it was a Legend of Zelda project, everyone worked hard on proposals and presented them in front of Aonuma-san with pounding hearts. 2 things I find really interesting about this. 1, it shows that Nintendo have reached a level of trust with Grezzo that is on par with the trust they put in teams like Intelligent Systems, external developers of some renown. Grezzo was founded by Mana's Koichi Ishii and has some pedigree in RPGs in its own right, but has also been such a long and stalwart partner of the Zelda team for a decade and a half now that it does feel thoroughly earned. More than that though, this business of canvassing a vast amount of ideas does seem to match the approach taken on both the Odyssey games, where director Kento Motokura talked about gathering ideas, and on Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Of course, with a company like Nintendo that focuses extensively on innovation, it's small wonder that they need a lot of bright and shiny new ideas, but perhaps in the past, the company has had a reputation for drawing its ideas mostly from the top. Even on Emmy of the Smiling Man, we saw that the direction of the story was not significantly informed by developer mages, but came from Yoshio Sakamoto primarily. However, by opening up to different inputs, it feels like Nintendo are perhaps becoming much more responsive to the interests of their staff than in the past, especially since Grezzo is a relatively fast-growing company, and it's quite likely that some of these staff canvassed were very new indeed to game development. It's the same kind of egalitarian approach that we saw with the Mario Wonder team, with so many different ideas for Wonder Flower transformations. Of course, Nintendo has had video conferencing ever since Miyamoto decided he needed a better way to collaborate with the Mario team over in Tokyo in the mid-2000s, but just as the global pandemic pushed other companies to more networked solutions, I wonder whether Nintendo's internal teams are also able to communicate a lot more freely with each other using electronic means than the days where you had to be on the same floor in a Kyoto office block to be able to share your ideas. In this sense, it must be a lot easier to gather the ideas of potentially hundreds of people in a short space of time. At any rate, it seems that after letting Grezzo go full tilt to an original Zelda, it's unlikely that this team will step back into the shadows again. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean an all-new title is next on the slate. Aonuma specifically says that Link's Awakening was the template for Zelda in 2D for this generation, and it's possible that he will decide to take a similar approach in the next generation of having a remake establish an art style and then use that shell to create something original from it. Still, I rather doubt it at this point. One of the issues with having such a large and dedicated and experienced studio as Grezzo now becomes that you have to keep them engaged and on board, and as they admit themselves, Grezzo had far less opportunity to contribute to the likes of Link's Awakening and prior remakes than they have now experienced with Echoes of Wisdom. And honestly, at this point in Nintendo's life, and after a period where remakes and remasters have outnumbered core titles for a long time, I am looking forward to more original Legend of Zelda projects taking centre stage once again. But if Sano and Terada are becoming more senior and more trusted with the 2D Zelda titles, what might we expect from them? It's interesting to look at their interaction with Eiji Aonuma on one of his more controversial statements, where Aonuma-san more or less confirmed something we had already suspected about a fundamental shift in the DNA of the Zelda series. He said, even when it comes to solving puzzles, in a game in the Legend of Zelda series, having the excitement of solving puzzles in your own unique way makes the game Legend of Zelda-like. Basically, if you're looking for a return to pre-Breath of the Wild approaches to puzzle solving, don't look for it in the main Zelda series, because as far as Aonuma-san's concerned, solving puzzles your way is intrinsically part of the Zelda gameplay approach now. And personally, as much as I love a tightly constructed puzzle box, I also think this degree of freedom makes for a thrilling gameplay style in its own right, so I can't say I'm too gutted. However, there is a ray of hope for people who like their game styles more tightly constructed. Sano-san's comments suggest that there is a limit to the openness they're willing to entertain. She notes, having the freedom to solve puzzles by yourself is a key feature of Legend of Zelda games, but having too much freedom can leave you feeling stumped. We made a conscious effort to clearly define the functions of each echo so that players understood how and where they should be used. We were mindful of designing it so that players could reach the gameplay elements we wanted them to experience without getting lost and confused. In this sense, they describe creating areas where players could be mischievous and, air quotes, cheat their way through, which is a little different from having a puzzle with no baseline solution that can simply be solved in multiple ways. It strikes me that this could end up being a landing zone for a compromise in the 3D Zelda space between those who like tightly curated dungeons and those who want maximum openness and experimentation at all times. Basically, there is a central method, but the game also encourages and rewards finding faster or different methods. It's also fascinating that this game's core mechanic of the echo abilities appears to have emerged from the dungeon maker capabilities in Zelda Link's Awakening, suggesting that despite the very long gap since a top-down Zelda had been tried, Aonuma was not rigidly approaching this with a view to reviving that specific narrow format. This reminds me of the way that the Super Mario Bros. Titles effectively took 11 years off because the development team were working on Super Mario Maker and its sequel. Takashi Tezuka was a little surprised when in a developer interview segment it was highlighted to him that there was this 11-year gap, and I suppose to him, he felt that he was still working with 2D Mario all the while, even if the final products ended up feeling more of spin-offs than core experiences. It seems we could easily have gone down this path with 2D Zelda. As Terada says, in one approach, Link could copy and paste various objects such as doors and candlesticks to create original dungeons. During this exploration phase, this idea was called an edit dungeon because players could create their own Legend of Zelda gameplay. And yet this concept was abandoned after a year, partly out of concerns that the sheer number of echoes would crash the game, but also out of an interest in taking the echo abilities in different directions. This may in part explain the unusually long development window for Echoes of Wisdom. 5 years have now passed since Link's Awakening Greystar Switches, which is Grezzo's longest dev cycle yet for a Zelda title. However, I also wonder if, unspoken but still surely of importance to the development team, they were influenced to make a change by the lukewarm response to Link's Awakening's admittedly rather limited Dungeon Maker, plus the relatively disappointing sales of Super Mario Maker 2. Well, if you can call 8 million plus sales disappointing, which I guess only works when you're talking about a franchise with the stratospheric potential of 2D Mario. Still, Nintendo has a habit of recycling elements, so I do wonder whether they will ever again try to crack the code of a dungeon maker for Zelda. The 40th anniversary is coming up in a couple of years, and if to avoid the issue of too many echoes crashing the game was a concern, they returned, as Mario Maker did, to the gameplay aesthetics of the 1986 original, or even to the 16-bit A Link to the Past style. It could result in something rather fun. I think that's unlikely though, since the Grezzo team seems firmly ensconced as the leaders of original top-down Zelda games. Questions remain about whether they will reboot the art style for the next system, and if they do, whether they will follow the same model of starting with a remake before doing something new, but either way, I am very relieved to see that after losing so many of their 2D staff over the years to other projects or to outside the company, there is now a long-standing group dedicated to this fantastic version of Zelda. A couple of coders, since I guess by this point in the video it's mainly regular viewers, hanging in there. Firstly, you may wonder what happened to some of the names I was tipping as potential directors. Well, Grezzo's Mikihara Ooiwa is still at project management in Grezzo according to the credits list I've seen, the most senior of these roles, and I suspect he was very heavily involved in this title once again. On Nintendo's end, Yoichi Yamada, who has been with Zelda since A Link to the Past, was also credited as the planning supervisor, continuing his trend of being a very senior figure without ever taking the director's chair himself. As for Rina Takada, she heads the list of credits for the level design team, confirming that she is still working at Grezzo and still at Nintendo, and I would not necessarily rule her out of further senior roles on a Grezzo Zelda in the future. Secondly, on a personal note, I have to say that I am absolutely loving Echoes of Wisdom, which at the time of recording I am a couple of hours into. This has been a quiet year, with my personal highlight until now being the release of Emmy of the Smiling Man, but any new Zelda is thrilling, and this one so far is exceptionally fun, and I hope everyone else is enjoying it as much as I am. This isn't primarily a review channel, but I like to flex the channel's format now and then, and so I'm considering doing a game review for Echoes of Wisdom when I finish it. Do let me know if you think that's something you might want to watch. Meanwhile, do check out the link to the developer interview below or one of the videos on screen. Thank you so much to the channel's Patreon community, thank you all for watching to the end, and I shall see you soon for another Nintendo Forecast.